Hello and welcome to the South Notts Amateur Radio online foundation training, and today we're going to discuss the licence conditions. In this presentation we're going to describe the rules and restrictions, UK call signs, operating practices and schedules and ban plans. Ofcom's the UK radio regulator. So effectively they're the police for the radio waves. They have the right to inspect your radio equipment, and they can order the restriction or modification of your equipment, ask you to keep a log, close down your station and even revoke your licence. You must notify Ofcom immediately if you change your name, main station or postal address. Please note there's commonly a question in the exam asking when you should notify Ofcom when you move, whether it's within so many days or whatever, and the key thing there is immediately. You must notify them immediately if you change your name, main station or postal address. To transmit, you must hold a valid licence and abide by its terms. There are 3 licences: Foundation, which you'll be taking shortly, Intermediate, and also a full or advanced licence. You'll receive something called a ban plan, and you need to check what applies to your foundation licence, as the rules differ for each licence level. Copies are available on the Ofcom website of these, so please review them to make yourself familiar with what they describe. So getting and validating your licence, you have to go online to the Ofcom website and create an account, which is free of charge, on the Ofcom online licensing website. You enter your candidate number to get your call sign and licence once you've passed your test, and every 5 years you must revalidate your licence. So that means going onto this same website and clicking revalidate, and that just lets them know that you still want to keep your call sign. We have had several people recently that haven't done this, and it's a real problem trying to get back into it and retrieve your call sign if you haven't revalidated it. So please do this at least every 5 years. More frequently is fine. If you do it once a year, every year, just in case, that's perfectly fine as well, but at least every year to avoid any inconvenience. So the amateur radio rules. This is a leisure activity only, and it cannot be used for commercial purposes. You must only communicate with other radio amateurs. Playing of music using offensive language and or threatening behaviour is unacceptable. You must not cause undue interference, and you must test that you are not doing so from time to time. And again, this is a common question in the exam. How often must you test your station? The answer is from time to time. So it's not a set amount of time, but if you ever got a visit from Ofcom, they would like to see some sort of log where you've tested the equipment every now and again, just to make sure that it is performing correctly and not causing problems. Amateur radio messages. You must not broadcast messages for general reception. For example, making announcements to multiple people or to anyone who may be listening. The exceptions to this are when calling CQ to make a first contact, or in a group or net of several amateurs where contact has already been established. Secret codes, meaning a code that obscures the meaning of what you're saying, and encryption of messages are not permitted. Please note that Morse code is okay, and that is not a secret. That is a well-known code, if you like. But using code words to hide the meaning is unacceptable. Foundation restrictions. You cannot operate from outside the UK. Other countries do not recognise the UK Foundation licence in general. So with the Foundation licence, you can only use it while you're in the UK. You cannot operate from a vessel at sea. Operation in inland waters, canals, rivers, including estuaries, is allowed, but operating maritime mobile at sea is not permitted at foundation or intermediate licence levels. At foundation, you can only use commercially available radios to transmit and kits that are commercially available that comply with Ofcom requirements. You cannot use self-built kits. It must be commercially available radios or kits that you've purchased. No UK amateur can operate from an aircraft, including a balloon. And again, these questions tend to come up regularly on the exams as well. If you have any questions about any of this, then please ask your tutor for more information. Call signs. The following applies when operating from England. The first licence level is the foundation licence, and currently the call signs will start with an M for mother and the number 7. It is then followed by 3 letters. The power limit for this licence is 10 watts, and in times gone by, before they ran out of these other letters, there was M3 and M6 instead of the M7s. So they started with M3, ran out of letters, went to M6, ran out of letters, and now they're on M7. So all these 3 call sign types all mean foundation license level. At the intermediate level, we're currently using 2, E for England, 0, and then 3 letters. And at the intermediate level, you're allowed to use 50 watts. And in times gone by, they used to use the 2 E for England, 1 prefix as well, until they ran out. So again, intermediate licence holders might be 2E0 or 2E1, and then 3 letters. Finally, the full call sign currently is M0 and 3 letters. You can use up to 400 watts, and there have been many iterations in the past that also are full call sign holders now, and those go as follows: G0s, G1s, G2, G3, G4, G5, G6, G7, G8, M1 and also M5, and those all are the full licence holders, same as M0. And just to bear those in mind, you may get a question certainly about which power limits apply, and usually a question on the naming pattern here for foundation M7s, intermediates 2E0s, and full licence holders M0s. Please note as well that while these are the general power outputs allowed, there are some restrictions on certain bands which require lower outputs for a particular reason. Call sign identifiers. These are known as the regional secondary locators, and you'll notice here for each area there is a different identifier. So for the region England, the identifier is E, and this only applies to the intermediate licence holders currently. So if you live in England and you're a foundation licence holder, you would just be M7 ABC, or whichever 3 letters you happen to be given. However, for intermediate licence holders, they are a 2E0, and the E actually stands for England. So please bear that in mind. As we go to the next ones, you'll see what I mean here. For Scotland, so if you live in Scotland and you get your licence, your identifier is M. Now the way to remember this for Scotland is to think of mountains in Scotland. So if you're a foundation licence holder, your call sign now is given an M in the actual call sign, and it goes just after the first M. So if you're a foundation licence holder, instead of M7ABC, if you live in Scotland, it would be MM7ABC. If you're a full licence holder, it would be MM0ABC. So those two work in the same manner. However, with intermediates, instead of 2E0, you would now be a 2M0. So instead of adding an additional M, the M is replacing the E from the 2E0. So you'd be a 2M0. For Wales, the identifier is W, so that's easy to remember. W for Wales. And again, for the foundation license holder, you're adding the W after the first M. So foundation would be MW7ABC. For full license, it would be MW0ABC. So foundation and full work in the same manner. Again, the intermediate, the W replaces that second letter rather than adding to it. So for the intermediate, it would be 2W0ABC. 2W0ABC. For Northern Ireland, we have an I. Again, easy to remember. I for Ireland. It would be MI7ABC for foundation. And for full, it would be MI0ABC. For intermediate, again, the same rules apply. The E for 2E0 would be changed to an I, so it would be 2I0ABC. The Isle of Man. Now, the capital of the Isle of Man is Douglas, the town of Douglas, so D for Douglas is the best way to remember this. And again, it would be MD7ABC. It would be MD0ABC for full license, and it would be 2D0ABC for intermediate. For the island of Jersey, it would be a J, again easy to remember, J for Jersey, and it would be MJ7ABC, it would be MJ0ABC, and it would be 2J0ABC for the intermediate. And finally, Guernsey, which is another island, a British island, it would be U, and the way to remember this is Guernsey, the second letter is U, so it's a U. And I suppose G isn't used because there's call signs beginning with, British call signs beginning with G, so maybe that's why. But U, the second letter of Guernsey is U. Again, MU7ABC, MU0ABC for full license, and 2U0ABC for intermediate. So with a little bit of practice, I would suggest practicing yourself and writing it out, just to remember each of these identifiers and where the letter goes in the call sign. Each call sign type, meaning foundation, intermediate or full, follows the same rules for itself, but just remember the intermediate replaces a letter instead of adding a letter. Again, if you have any questions or difficulties with this, please see your tutor who will be happy to help and do a bit of practice with you. Using your call sign. The license states that you must use your call sign as frequently as practicable. This is a question that again comes up regularly, and it would ask, when do you need to give your call sign, or how often do you need to give your call sign during a conversation? It used to be every 15 minutes, and I believe in a long time ago it used to be after every sentence. You know, when you passed over, you'd give it again. Luckily, they've relaxed those rules since they seemed extreme, and you're meant to give your call sign as frequently as practicable, which is sort of from time to time. But as frequently as practicable is the phrase you will see on your exam, and you need to make sure you pick that one. So your station is clearly identifiable at all times and in an appropriate format. What this generally means is if somebody listens in, if Ofcom decides to listen into the conversation for some reason, if they listen for a reasonable period of time, they should hear everybody give their call sign at some point. And this is for identification if they need to contact you about somebody else causing interference or problems, etc. So it's just so that listeners can identify you. In an appropriate format means that you need to give your call sign in the format that you are using to make the conversation. So if you're talking, you need to say your call sign. If you're in Morse code, you give your call sign in Morse code. If you're on data, you give your call sign in with the data. You're using the same method for giving your call sign and communicating. It's advisable to give your call sign when you're calling CQ or making contact with another amateur. This is obviously clearly so that they know who you are, you know who they are. Also, whenever you change frequency, you need to give your call sign. So if you pop to another frequency and start chatting there, you need to be giving your call sign again for anybody who's listening on that frequency. When you change mode, meaning from Morse code to voice, or voice to data, or data to Morse code, whenever you change the mode of communication, you also need to give your call sign again. For those listening on that mode, you need to be identifiable. When you change to another regional secondary locator, you need to be giving your call sign. So if you do start talking in England and then move to Wales, you need to give your call sign again with the W in, so that people now realise you're in Wales and not in England, and that goes for any region. But generally, most people aren't moving as they talk unless you happen to be in a car, so it's not a common thing to worry about. But if you are travelling and talking, when you go over the border, you need to be giving your call sign again with the appropriate regional secondary locator. It's common practice for amateurs to give their call sign at the start and or end of each over, especially when they're taking part in a group net. This is not required, but you'll hear it all the time, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's very frequent, but it's a habit, and it's not necessarily a bad habit to be in, so that as people start talking and stop talking, you know who it was. Call sign suffixes. It's not required to use suffixes, but it is recommended. It's recommended to give these suffixes and also your location. But again, this isn't required by the rules, but it's good operating practice. So, there are several suffixes that are used. The first one is /m, and it would be said in that manner, /m or /m. And this means you're mobile. So this could be that you're driving in the car and you're on the radio, you're a pedestrian, or you're on inland waterways, and essentially you're moving, you're travelling. How would this look? Well, in the example there, for a foundation licence holder in Scotland who's in a car driving down the road, he would say, my call sign's MM7 ABC /M. So the M in the MM7 means he's in Scotland. Because it's a 7, we know that it's a foundation licence holder, and the /M means that he's mobile, he's moving, he's travelling. So it gives a lot of information in a very short piece of conversation, and very useful. So it is recommended to use these. Now, if you're talking on the radio at a fixed location, but it's at a friend's house, or at a community centre, or at the radio club's shack, you can use /A for alternative address. So this is a place with an actual street address, and in the example here we have 2 Echo 0, so it means he's in England. He's an intermediate holder because of the layout of the call sign there, and he's /A, so we know that he's stationary in a residence or building, but it's not his home address, or not his main address as it is on his licence, which is mostly people's home address. So again, it's another good piece of information, /A alternative postal address. The next one here is /P, and you'll hear this frequently. /P means portable, and generally this doesn't mean that you're travelling in a vehicle. What it means is you've gone out into a field with no postal address, there's no postcode, you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's not a building with a street address, it's generally a field day type situation, on top of a hill maybe, that sort of thing. So this is where /A doesn't apply, it's more of a out in the wilderness type. So /P would be somebody perhaps backpacking or going for a walk, biking, something like that, and they've stopped, they've set up a station, and they're transmitting. So in this case, M7PPP is obviously in England because there's no secondary identifier. He's a foundation licence holder because he's an M7, and he's /P, so he's portable somewhere. So again, this is a popular call you'll hear, and it gives you an idea that they're out in a special location, not the normal main station. The final one here is /MM, and this stands for Maritime Mobile. This means you're on a vessel at sea, and only full licence holders are allowed to do this. The call sign's M0QQQ/MM, so this is a full call sign holder. MM, so he's on a vessel at sea. And again, please remember this /MM is not permitted at foundation or intermediate levels. Supervision clause. A licence holder can let another UK licensed amateur use their equipment and call sign under direct supervision. So when you get your foundation licence, you could go to the house of a full licensed amateur and use their equipment and use the full call sign with all its privileges. So you could use 400 watts here, provided you're under their direct supervision. Now, why is this? Why would you let a foundation licence holder use 400 watts? Well, the idea is that if you're under the direct supervision of a full licence holder, he will make sure nothing goes wrong and that all of the licence requirements are met. This is why it says direct supervision. He can't set you up and then go off to the pub for a pint, because if anything happens and you're not aware that you're causing a problem, then obviously there can be issues. So that full licence holder needs to be there supervising you directly, sitting with you, watching how you operate and being ready to step in if there's a problem. Provided that's all the case, you can use full privileges even though you're only a foundation licence holder. And this is something I'd recommend trying out because it can give you insight into more of the hobby. If you're letting another amateur use your call sign, they must adhere to your licence conditions. For example, a foundation licence holder, M7ABC, could let a full licence holder, M0QQQ, use the M7ABC call sign, but you would have to, being the foundation licence holder, you would have to supervise the full licence holder. Another thing this brings up is that if you're using somebody else's licence, their licence is their responsibility. So they need to be there to make sure that you're not giving abusive language or playing music, because if that happens, they will be in trouble because it's their licence that is causing the problem. So it's important that the licence holder is present and policing the use of their own licence. You'll notice in this example as well, the full licence holder's using a foundation licence call sign. So that full licence holder has to follow all of the regulations that the foundation licence requires. So the full licence holder with his full licence can use 400 watts. However, if he calls out M7ABC, he's restricted to 10 watts and all the other restrictions that apply to foundation licence. So it's not the person that the restrictions apply to, it's the licence. The licence you call out determines what you are allowed to or not allowed to do. So please remember this: if you're using someone else's licence, you are restricted by their terms, not by your own licence in that case. So provided they're there, or you're there directly supervising them or vice versa, that's fine, but you're at the restriction of their licence if you're using their licence. If you have any questions about this, again, please consult your tutor, but hopefully this is fairly obvious. Now it's explained. It's the licence that determines what can be done, not the person. Please note as well, only a full licence holder can supervise a student, meaning someone on a training course. So if they're unlicensed and they're going on the air as part of their training, etc., a full licence holder is the only one that can supervise that. You cannot do it at foundation or intermediate. The user service clause. In certain circumstances, you may be asked to pass messages on behalf of a user service, or allow your equipment to be used by them directly. Encryption of messages in these cases is permitted if requested by the user service. So who are the user services? These include the British Red Cross, St John's Ambulance, the St Andrews Ambulance Association, Women's Royal Voluntary Service, Salvation Army, any government department, any Category 1 responder, such as emergency services, principal local authorities, environment agencies, NHS, etc., etc. Any Category 2 responder as well, which are utility companies, Network Rail, airport operators, harbour authorities, etc. So these are serious organisations, excuse me, usually to do with safety, obviously, and they can ask you to pass messages on their behalf or request that they use your equipment. This could be for something serious, to avoid a crash or to save a life, and if they need to encrypt the messages in order to protect somebody's safety or identity, then they are allowed to do it, since it's an emergency situation. So you may get a question in the exam and it might say something to the effect of, if a user service such as British Red Cross, St John's Ambulance, etc., etc., needs to use your radio, are they allowed? And they'll have several answers. Please be aware that, or it might ask the other way, who's allowed to use your equipment as part of a user service, and it might list a few examples like British Red Cross, the local school teacher, and a few other sort of examples. You need to know as a good idea of who these user services are. The schedule. The schedule is part of your licence. The schedule describes the different frequencies and it lists you as primary or secondary. What this means is the primary user takes precedence over the secondary user. So if you're on a frequency having a chat and you're a secondary user on that frequency, if a primary user comes on and says, we need to use this frequency, you need to move, then you must do so. We need to watch the exceptions on the schedule here. There's 3 in particular that they like to ask about. Charing Cross, which you'll notice is the second column from the left, and you're a secondary user on those frequencies, and you're not available to use these within 100 kilometres radius of Charing Cross, London. So you'll get a question about that. Please note that you cannot use these frequencies within a 100 kilometre radius of Charing Cross. ERP is another common question. You'll notice on the far right column, on certain frequencies there, the highlighted ones in yellow, it mentions that the maximum power you can use is not what your licence states, the 10, 50 or 400 watts. It might be 1 watt or 10 watts, but also some of them state ERP. What this means, if you remember, is it's taking into account the gain of the antenna as well. So if it says 10 watts ERP, you might set your radio to 10 watts, but if you've got a Yagi attached that has a gain of 3 decibels, for example, which is a ×2 gain, you're actually transmitting out effectively 20 watts and you would be breaking your licence conditions. So please take particular care in looking at these frequencies here, because the type of aerial you use does matter and will affect the results. All these highlighted boxes here in yellow are ones that tend to get questions about them. Particularly it mentions the exception of 1 watt. You'll notice at the very top and very bottom of those yellow boxes on the right hand column, the very top one restricts to 1 watt ERP, and at the very bottom 4 also state 1 watt. So these can catch out if you're trying to remember rather than looking it up, and you will be provided with this sheet in the exam, so make sure you do check on each one carefully. A brief description of this sheet is on the left-hand column you've got the frequency in bands. The second column describes whether you're a primary user or secondary user. The third column, again, this describes primary use or secondary use. And this is to do with the satellite services in particular. And then the final column is the maximum power allowed. This describes it in watts, but also decibels relative to 1 watt. So if it's 10 decibels relative to 1 watt, that means 10 watts. And just be careful of the ERP as well. You'll notice not all of them state ERP. So some of them, the ERP doesn't matter. Some of them it does. Again, if you have any questions about this, need further explanation, or just want to go through it again with somebody to make sure you've got it spot on, don't hesitate to contact your tutor for more help. As well as the schedule, you'll have the band plan. The band plan is effectively a gentleman's agreement within the UK. There are no hard, fast rules to who can use what frequency with what mode, but just so that it's not a big mismatch of people using different things in different areas and struggling to find someone else that's using the same mode as you because it's all over the place, they have come up with this plan. This is in place to ensure amateur bands are used fairly as well. So the narrow modes, things like Morse code, CW and data, are mostly near the lower frequencies of the band. On this diagram you'll see it's at the top, the lower frequencies. And the broader modes, it gets broader as you go towards the bottom of the page, which is the higher frequencies. There are some exceptions here as well. Beacons, repeaters and space communications, you'll notice they have their own frequencies and they're highlighted in yellow there. So 144.400 to 144.490 are propagation beacons only. And again, this is a gentleman's agreement. This isn't law. However, if they set up beacons in that area and you start transmitting, it's going to ruin the propagation beacons' ability to do their job. So please stick to the band plan to avoid upsetting anyone. And likewise down the bottom, repeaters and space communications, again, they want to be left alone to do their thing, and there's plenty of other space on the band, so you don't need to interrupt them. So the licence conditions summary: you can't operate from an aircraft at sea or overseas. You're not allowed to transmit music, to do broadcasting, secret codes, transmitter construction, unless it's a compliant kit, obviously. Ofcom has the power to inspect and close down your station if you're causing problems. You need to learn the required call signs and suffixes, because there will be some questions on that. And get familiar with the schedule and band plans provided in the exam. So when you're in the exam, it's not a panic, you're already familiar with them and you can refer to them quickly and easily. They tend to ask about the exceptions rather than the norm, so be familiar with those few exceptions we mentioned, because that's what tends to catch people out. If you have any questions at all or need help, don't hesitate to contact your tutor, and please watch this video several times as we do go through it fairly quickly, and it may take several views of a particular topic for it to sink in.